Hey, everybody, this is Vic Ryckaert with WRTV, and I'm here chatting with Purdue entomology educator, Dr. Elizabeth Barnes. And we're talking about the Brood 10, called by dummies like me, Brood X, cicadas. And Doctor, why don't you tell us a little bit about these cicadas?
Sure. So the 17-year cicadas have been hanging out underground for, well, the past 17 years. They spend their time there feeding on tree roots where they basically drink the liquid out of the tree roots. So they're not actually like chewing them up and damaging or anything. They grow for a while, and then when it hits that 17-year mark, they crawl up to the surface and then wait for the conditions to be just right. So a lot of people might be seeing holes in their yards or little like piles of mud that look like little chimneys. And those are the cicadas kind of hanging out, seeing what the air feels like until it's ready for them to emerge. Then they'll come out, they'll molt, they'll climb up into the trees, and in a few days, you'll hear a loud buzzing sound, which is what the cicadas sound like when they sing.
So singing, that loud buzzing is singing. How loud is it?
It's pretty loud. I've heard it described a few different ways. Either like being right next to a really loud lawnmower or a jet plane flying high overhead. So somewhere between those two is the noise level. So it will be kind of overpowering to hear.
So these things have been underground for 17 years. What are they doing down there?
They're just eating and growing. They're not doing much otherwise. They look quite different. So I brought an exuvia, which is basically they shed their exoskeleton and leave a perfect replica of their nymphal stage, which is the larval stage. And so that's what they look like. They look nothing like what we see on the trees when they're down there.
And so they come out every 17 years to sing and reproduce, right? And
they they come out every 17 years. They're not going to harm us. They don't bite, they don't sting. They come out just to reproduce. The males are the ones that are singing. The females respond by clicking their wings, and they will lay their eggs in tree branches. And I feel like that's where they might get a bit of a bad reputation because the tips of tree branches might die off. And so it looks like your tree is really sick because there's all these little kind of brown twigs all over the tree. And really what's going on is it's just the cicadas giving a light pruning. As long as your tree is healthy and as long as your tree is a good size. Smaller trees might have an issue.
you talked about, is it, help me, ovipositor? Is that what they?
Yes, yes. So an ovipositor, it's basically, it looks like a little needle that the females have, and that's what they use to lay their eggs. So they stick it into things, kind of like a syringe, and almost inject their eggs into the tree branches, which sounds scary, but they're not gonna do it to you. It's just to the trees.
And so these eggs, how long does it take for the eggs to hatch, and what do they look like, and what do they do?
It's usually a decent amount of time. So it can be up to 8 weeks for the eggs to hatch. And until then, they're just hanging out in the tree, developing. Then once they hatch, the nymphs will crawl out and drop to the ground. They're really, really tiny at that stage. You might notice them in the soil because they'll often drop to the ground in decent sized groups, and there'll be these little tiny like white things in the ground, and spiders will pounce on them. Basically, everything that lives in the soil will get a nice little meal. And then the ones that survive will burrow down into the soil and start the cycle all over again.
And they're feeding on tree roots somehow.
Yeah, so cicadas' mouth parts are basically like a little straw. So they stick that straw into the tree roots, and then they're able to drink the liquid out of the tree. It's similar to a mosquito, but for trees instead.
Okay, so that's what they've been doing for 17 years.
Yes.
Now it's time for them to come up. What are we about to experience here? Or what are they doing right now, and where are they going?
So right at the moment, they're still hanging out close to the surface because it cooled down. We didn't get them quite as early as we were expecting. It's supposed to be warmer next week, and I'm really hoping it'll be warm enough for the cicadas. Um, but once they come out, really all they're going to do is they're going to come out for about a month and a half at the most if conditions are good. The males will sing, they will make a racket, they might fly around, they might run into you. But they're not really trying to, they're not really interested in people. They're mainly just interested in trees, and sometimes they get confused. And yeah, so there'll be a lot of cicadas in the trees. You'll probably also potentially see other animals eating the cicadas, because this is going to be a huge, excellent feast for them. Everything from birds to fish to, foxes and squirrels, basically anything that can eat an insect will be eating cicadas.
So that reminds me of one of the questions we've gotten from folks.
Mhm.
Pets, are they harmful to pets? And what happens if my dog eats one?
So that's it's at their base, cicadas are not poisonous. They don't really have any defenses other than their large numbers, so they're not poisonous to your dog. However, that said, dogs could potentially have an allergic reaction to them. Also, their exoskeletons are really hard to digest, so if your dog eats a whole bunch of them, they might throw up. And then also, there's always the potential issue of if the cicadas have been treated with some sort of insecticide and then your dog eats it, it's not really the cicada causing the problem, it's the insecticide. So what we're telling people is if your dog eats a cicada, it's just like with a grasshopper or something like that. Don't panic, but keep an eye on them. And if they seem off, contact a vet if you're worried.
And that one of the questions we got from a reader, or one of our viewers is, can people eat them?
Yeah, people can eat them. It's similar recommendations for people as with dogs, where you can definitely eat cicadas. There's a long history of people eating them, all the way back as far as we have, written or oral records. People have been eating cicadas. Sometimes they've been really important for people in times where food is scarce. They are able to eat the cicadas and survive. Sometimes it's a treat. So there are lots of ways to eat cicadas. There are some good recipes out there. What we've been telling people is it's sort of like a shrimp, where anything you can do with a shrimp, you can also do with a cicada. But the bonus is cicadas also go well on sweet things like, ice cream or cookies. Couple things that we do want to warn people about, though. First, if you are allergic to shellfish, you are probably also allergic to cicadas, because they're pretty closely related and they have a lot of basically overlapping allergens. So avoid them if you're allergic to shellfish. The second thing is, it's something you're gathering from the wild. So, as with anything that you're gathering for the wild, you want to use your common sense about what you're choosing. Like, don't pick up dead cicadas off the ground. Harvest healthy live cicadas and freeze them, because that's a humane way to kill them as well. Um, and make sure you're cooking them thoroughly. Try and avoid any that, if they've been treated with insecticide, you want to avoid that. And if you eat a cicada and you don't feel good, again, consult a doctor. But you can eat them. There's nothing inherent in the cicada itself that prevents you from eating it.
I'm guessing, as a bug expert, you've eaten a cicada or two.
I haven't eaten cicadas, but I have eaten many, many other insects, grasshoppers, mealworms, lots of crickets. I actually, in my pantry right now, I've got some cricket powder, which is, it's basically ground up crickets, and you can use it kind of like flour. It's got this like really good nutty flavor, and it's good protein. Yeah, and it takes a little bit, I will say, it takes a little bit to get over the idea that you're eating an insect. But once you do, they're delicious.
That's amazing. So do you ever make like cricket bread and bring it to the office?
I haven't yet, but I should. I have made cookies with it before, and I'm going to make some banana bread soon, because I think that'll be good. I think the like nutty flavor and the bananas will go well together.
Before the pandemic, there was the park district here had a bug fest,
Mm.
at Southeast Way Park. And I would take my kids there, and they would always go to the chocolate covered cricket area where they would give out chocolate covered crickets. So yeah, my boys are big fans of chocolate covered crickets. I wonder if you could put a chocolate on cicadas. I'm sure my kids would eat those too.
Oh
All right.
yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
All right. So another question we got from readers: do they make good fishing bait?
Yes. A lot of fishermen that I know are really looking forward to the cicada emergence because I mean you've got bait right there. If you've got a river with a big cicada emergence right next to it, you can just, grab them right there and use them for fishing. Yeah, so that's definitely something you can do. The fish love them. They'll be falling into the rivers too, so the fish will also already be seeing them and eating them and knowing that they're delicious. So yeah, that's something you can do with them.
And they come out in such huge numbers. What are we going to see? How many are we going to experience here?
A lot. So of course it's going to depend on the area that you're in, but the areas with the biggest emergences can have up to 1.5 million cicadas per acre, which is it's really an incredible, overwhelming number of cicadas, and means that you're not going to be able to ignore them if you're in an area with a really high emergence. Um, a lot of people want to know specifically, like, okay, so that's a lot of cicadas. Do I need to worry at my house? Um, and we don't have a like really precise map of emergence locations, but there's a couple ways that you can kind of get an idea about how many cicadas are going to be there. So first, there are going to be more in southern Indiana than there are in northern Indiana. Second, if you have really old trees nearby, it makes it more likely that you'll have cicadas because they need to be feeding all the time for that 17-year period. So if you get rid of the trees, you lose the cicadas. And then third, just, ask your neighbors. If you have someone who's lived there for a long time, they will remember if there was a big emergence last time. And if they don't remember a lot of cicadas and they were here in 2004, there's a good chance you'll be safe and there won't be a lot of cicadas.
And someone asked, are they like locusts? And what's the difference between a cicada and a locust?
Yeah. So unfortunately, people often use the word cicada and locust interchangeably, which means that people tend to panic when they hear that we're getting a massive locust emergence because they think, oh God, it's a plague of locusts. Um, but locusts are actually they're basically grasshoppers, whereas cicadas are completely different. They're a completely different type of insect, more like plant hoppers. Locusts have chewing mouth parts, so basically it's more like little teeth, and they actually eat plant tissue and destroy plant tissue. Whereas cicadas have piercing sucking mouth parts, so those are those little straws that they're just making a small hole in the tree and then they are drinking the liquid in the tree. So they do much less damage. They're only going to be feeding on deciduous trees and only laying their eggs on deciduous trees. I mean, 99% of the time. Occasionally a cicada gets confused and tries to lay its eggs in corn or tries to drink from corn, but that's very, very rare. 99% of the time, just deciduous trees, so trees that lose their leaves in the fall. And they're going to be leaving, your garden, crops, things like that alone.
I've heard the holes that they leave in the ground is kind of a form of aeration. Is that right?
Yeah, because there's so many of them, and they're making these big holes that they aerate the soil. They have all sorts of really interesting kind of ripple effects throughout the ecosystem when they come out.
Could you talk about some of those? That's really fascinating.
Sure. Well, so there are big effects on both plants and animals. Basically, what is happening is this biomass, this concentration of nutrients that's been accumulating and growing underground for the past 17 years, all of a sudden is coming up to the surface all at once. And so that's a big change in the nutrient cycle in the environment. So that means that all sorts of animals are going to be very, very well fed. One thing that we tend to often see after a cicada emergence, for example, is better survival of birds in their nests. So the young birds, because their parents are better able to feed them if they're insectivores eating insects. Um, Also, we tend to see an uptick in things like mice and rats because, a healthier rat is able to produce more babies and have more babies survive. There tend to be fatter turkeys in the fall after cicada emergence. So, kind of good and bad from our perspective. And then in terms of plants, there's the aeration of the soil that you mentioned, but also when the cicadas die, it's this huge input of basically fertilizer at a time of year when the plants aren't usually getting fertilizer. So that can kind of boost the growth of the plants, and that helps them out a little bit. So there's all sorts of really cool effects, which is one of the reasons why scientists are so excited about all of this.
You seem very excited about this. Can you tell us how you, I don't know, came to be a bug doctor?
Sure. I mean, I don't know exactly why it happened. I was one of the weird kids running in the backyard catching, dragonflies, and I had a pet grasshopper when I was a kid. I found it; it was missing a leg. I convinced myself that like it needed help, and I would feed it grass and stuff. Um, yeah, and then I just stayed interested through the years and found out that you could do this professionally and that people would actually pay you money to learn about insects and look at insects, and it was just, yep, that was going to be my career.
And you know, one thing, everybody who's watching should follow you on Twitter because you have a fascinating Twitter account. And you talked about being out in the woods with a television station and stumbling across a moth. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was one of my more like typical entomologist moments. I was we were walking along, and they were filming, and I had a mic on and everything, and I noticed this beautiful moth. It's, they're about the size of your hand. They're massive. And it's just like a switch goes off in my brain, and I like dropped to my knees, and I like picked it up very gently and started like, oh, look at your beautiful wings, look at your antenna, and like start talking to the moth. And then I showed them the moth, and then I moved it over to a tree because it was in the middle of a lawn and I didn't want it to get run over with a lawnmower. But yeah, I can't help myself. I love moths and dragonflies in particular. They're my two favorite groups of insects. So it's just got to stop and look.
Yeah, I think, and before when we talked, you said they're cute.
Yeah, they're adorable. Particularly like I think moths, if you really look at them carefully, I think moths are a little bit easier to appreciate as cute than other insects because they've got these big eyes and these fuzzy little legs and these fuzzy little antennas, and they look quite cuddly if you look at them up close.
And that particular moth, you posted photos on your Twitter, is really dramatic. It was really something.
Yes, that type of moth, they're closely related to Luna moths, which is one that people might be more familiar with. So they're these huge night flying moths that you don't often encounter because they're not as common as the smaller moths, and they're also out at night when most of us are in bed asleep. So it's really exciting to encounter one during the day.
So I'm getting some other questions now. Did you one person is asking, do I need to cover my small trees, my newly planted trees?
Um, you might want to if you're in an area where there is a big emergence. It's it's the best way to do it is to use insect netting. There have been a bunch of studies that have shown that's actually, it's cheaper than insecticide and more effective than insecticide because the cicadas will just keep coming back. And usually if you just, you net your trees, you cover all those small branches and you leave it up until Typically what I would say is wait for the cicadas to stop singing and then wait another week or two after that, because once they've stopped singing, the males have stopped looking for mates, but that doesn't mean the females have stopped laying eggs. So wait for the end of singing, then a week or two, and then you should be safe to take the netting off your trees. Um, but that said, it's kind of dependent on how much damage you're willing to tolerate on your trees.
And mature trees are going to be okay, right?
Yes, unless they're really stressed or unhealthy for some other reason, most mature trees should be perfectly fine. Like I said, it looks bad, but they're okay. It's just like a light pruning on those trees.
And you're a entomologist, right? How
Yes.
does one become an entomologist?
I studied biology for my undergrad. I did just general biology, and then I went and got my doctorate in ecology, but I focused on plant insect interactions, which means I spent 6 years in the mountains in Colorado's just staring at caterpillars and raising caterpillars on different diets and things like that. And then wrote up a dissertation about it. So, yeah, but I mean, you don't have to go to grad school to be an entomologist. But if have some sort of biology focus in college, then that's a good start on that path.
Now, we talked, getting back to the cicadas, there are a couple of apps, right? Ways that regular people who want to help can help.
Yes, yes, and we would really appreciate the help. The more data that we get about them now, the better we're able to do both, things like genetics and population biology research, but also the better recommendations we're able to give for management in the future. I would love to be able to tell people like, yes, your house last time had a ton of cicadas. You should protect your trees, or no, you're going to be okay. So the two apps that people can use are Cicada Safari, which is a cicada specific app, and you put your cicada pictures on there, and then they will have experts who are reviewing those all the time and confirming whether they're cicadas or not. And then the second is iNaturalist, which is a more general biodiversity app. And I really like to use, particularly when I don't know what something is, because you can take a picture of something, you upload it onto iNaturalist, and it gives you a bunch of suggestions about what it might be. You can select one of those suggestions, and then you share it, and then other people around the world are able to come in and confirm what it is that you're looking at. For example, I do caterpillars a lot. I help people with caterpillar IDs just kind of for fun.
And those are apps just on any smartphone, right? You can find them
Yes.
in the
Yep.
app store.
Yep. Any
And
smartphone.
I think readers would be very mad if I didn't ask you about zombies. Can you tell us about zombie cicadas?
Sure. Yeah, this is one of the kind of creepier aspects to the cicada emergence and insects in general. There's a type of fungus that infects the cicadas, and essentially it replaces their abdomen with their fungal spores. And it looks like cotton is stuck on their butt, basically, or like an eraser that's all chewed up or something. And then that fungus produces chemicals that, one, make the cicadas stay active. Like normally, if you've lost like a third of your body, you'd probably want to be kind of sluggish and curled up in cicada equivalent of a bed. But these chemicals that they release make the cicadas stay active and moving around and spreading the fungal spores. And it also makes the males start responding to the calls of other males by clicking their wings, which is how females normally respond. So then those uninfected cicadas come over, try and mate with the infected cicada, and it spreads the pathogen onto them. So it's quite creepy. You might notice occasionally a cicada, and you look at it and you think that's that's half a cicada right there. That's not a whole cicada anymore, and it's because their abdomen has fallen off. Because it's been infected with this fungus, and they can lose their abdomen and just keep walking around. It's very strange.
Yeah, no kidding. It's scary and really diabolical. How
Yeah,
does how does nature create something like that?
it's absolutely bizarre. And it's all about it's selection for what allows the different organisms to reproduce the best. So this is what over time has allowed this fungus to reproduce really well. There are other ones where they will lay their eggs inside of the insect and then it grows in the insect and bursts out of its side. That which it's like Alien. It's exactly like the movie Alien, but for insects. There's a whole range of really horrendous things that happen to insects that are really bizarre. And I think people would be a little bit more sympathetic to them if they knew this.
And I mean, it's not just spiders, and the things that lay eggs are wasps, right? Or hornets, wasps.
They're usually either wasps or flies. So a lot of times people will see wasps with like really long, they look like they've got really long stingers and they think, oh God, that's really scary, stay away from me. But actually, a lot of times when they have those really long stingers, that's so that they can inject their eggs into something else. And sometimes that's even a tree as well.
So if we run into, are we going to be seeing those wasps now with these 17-year cicadas?
Um, yeah, probably not as many as people are afraid of. There is a wasp called the Cicada Killer that does what I just described. So they catch cicadas, they paralyze them, and then they lay their eggs inside them. Then they bury them underground, and the cicada stays alive while the baby wasp larva eats it, which is again, it's really gruesome. It's both gruesome and fascinating at the same time. But those wasps are they're more closely timed to the annual cicada life cycle instead of the 17-year cicada life cycle. So we think that they're probably not going to overlap much. So we're probably not going to see an increase in those wasp numbers. The wasps are big. They're a little bit intimidating looking, and people often get them confused with murder hornets. So if you see a really big wasp in Indiana, don't panic immediately and think it's a murder hornet. It's more likely to be a cicada killer.
Good enough. Doctor,
Yes.
I know some people might have come on late, so I'm going to ask again. When are we going to see these cicadas and how long are they going to be here?
So the cicadas are waiting for the ground temperature to be 64 degrees and for there to be a warm rain. We had thought that that was going to be last week or early this week, and then it got cold on us because the weather just likes to mess with our predictions. So I looking at the weather forecast, it looks like next week it's going to warm up. So we're hoping that next week is when they're going to emerge. The cicadas are certainly ready. They're sitting at the tops of their burrows, waiting for the weather to be just right. There's, let me see, I have, what is this called? So the Indiana State Climate Office actually has a map that shows the soil temperature in different parts of Indiana. And I'm looking at it right now. And unfortunately, from my perspective, I want the cicadas to be out now. But unfortunately, the warmest soil temperature is about 58.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not warm enough for them yet.
What does it need to be?
64 degrees.
64 degrees is like go time for cicadas.
Yes. Yes. So we're close, but we're not quite there yet.
So probably is it going to be about the time we want to plant our tomatoes, they're going to come out, or
I mean, they might. I don't. In the next 2 weeks, unless it continues to be very cold. And I'm going to say that, and it's going to be an unusually cold month now, just to spite me. But as long as it warms up a little bit, I think we're going to start seeing cicadas in the next few weeks.
and how long are they going to be here?
About a month and a half if the weather is good for them. It can be a little bit less, so it can be more like a month or a tiny bit more like 7 weeks if the weather's really good. But typically they're here for about a month and a half.
Doctor, thank you so much for taking some time today. Is there anything else you want to tell us about cicadas or bugs, or how great bugs are, how cute they are?
I mean, I could talk about bugs all day, but I think most people probably don't want to listen to me talk about bugs all day. But I will say, so if people want to have some fun with this, and I do encourage people to have some fun with this emergence, on our Bug Bowl webpage, we have a few activities people can do. We've got, origami cicadas. My house is littered with origami cicadas now. We're actually doing a cookie decorating contest where people can take any cookie and decorate it like a cicada, and they can win some prizes, including cookie mix that is made with crickets. So if you want to try that, that's something you can win. But overall, if you're worried about this emergence, don't worry, it's going to be over in a month and a half, and then you won't have to deal with them for a very long time. But if you think you might be able to enjoy it at all, I encourage people to get out there and appreciate it, because it's this amazing natural phenomenon that only happens every 17 years.
Very cool, Doctor. Listen, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. And I could listen to you talk about bugs for hours. And I'm sure many of our viewers could too.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. And to be clear, folks, if you see cicadas, they're not going to hurt you. They're probably not going to hurt your pets, but might give your dog an upset stomach if he eats too many, right?
Yep.
So there's nothing to worry about. Then if your trees are good to go, if your trees are older, they're not going to hurt your trees. Cover your trees if they're young and you're worried about it.
Yep, that's the nice thing about this particular insect emerging in these numbers is they're really not harmful. They're not destructive for most things. So you can just enjoy it.
Enjoy it. Enjoy the loud jet airplane lawnmower sounds in your yard.
The singing, they're singing to each other.
Oh, Doctor, I almost let you go. Tell me about Brood X.
Yes. Yeah. So Brood X, it sounds so much cooler than Brood 10. I know you're supposed to say it Brood 10. I don't get mad when people say Brood X because it sounds very sci-fi, and I approve of that. But they use Roman numerals to number the different broods. So depending on the year that they're emerging, they get different Roman numerals. But technically it's pronounced Brood 10, not Brood X. Boring, that is.
So if you're not a bug doctor, go ahead and call it Brood X.
Yeah, not gonna.
If you are a bug doctor, your colleagues, your peers are going to make fun of you.
Yes, we will get teased a bit.
Okay. Well, Doctor, thank you. I'm totally looking forward to Brood X. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. And thanks everybody for watching.